My dad left my mom and me for a better life with his new wife and kids. Years later, his perfect family collapsed, and he came crawling back to me, begging for a place to stay. I shut the door in his face. Have you ever been completely betrayed by someone you trusted? I was, by the one person who should have always had my back, my dad. It all started years ago when my dad made the decision that would forever change our lives. He left my mom and me without a second thought, claiming he was searching for a better life. At the time, I was heartbroken. But little did I know, that better life would come with a new wife and kids, and he was leaving behind everything that truly mattered to chase an illusion of happiness. For years, I watched as my dad built this new perfect family. From the outside, it seemed like everything he ever wanted had fallen into place: a new wife, a couple of kids, and a life he'd always dreamed of. And while I tried to move on, the pain of being abandoned never really went away. I couldn't help but wonder, was I not enough for him? Did he ever think of me and my mom after everything that happened? I had a million questions, but I pushed them aside, telling myself he made his choice and we needed to find a way to move on too. But life, as it often does, has a way of turning things upside down. Years later, after what seemed like a lifetime of happiness for him, my dad's perfect little world came crashing down. His new family, the one he chose over me, fell apart in ways I never expected. Suddenly, my dad was no longer living the dream. The perfect family wasn't so perfect after all, and he was left with nothing. That's when he came crawling back. Yes, you heard that right. After everything he put me and my mom through, after all the hurt and the years of silence, he showed up at my door, begging for a place to stay. He needed help. He was desperate. And guess who he came to? Me. The daughter he abandoned. What do you think I did? I'll tell you exactly how I responded in the next part of the story. Stay tuned. When my dad showed up on my doorstep, I didn't know how to react. I had spent years carrying the weight of his absence, and now he was standing in front of me, looking like a shadow of the man he used to be. He wasn't the same person I remembered, the one who had left us so easily without a single word of apology. His face was worn, tired, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It almost felt like a stranger standing there. But I couldn't just ignore him. Part of me, the part that still remembered when he was my hero, wanted to rush into his arms and forgive him instantly. But the other part, the part that had suffered through all those years of silence, all the hurt and anger, wanted to slam the door right in his face. How could I trust him? How could I just forget everything that had happened? Before I could say anything, he started talking. He told me how his new wife had left him, how the kids from his second marriage had grown distant, and how his perfect life had crumbled. He said he had nowhere to go, no one left, and that he was sorry for everything he'd put me through. His voice trembled, and I could tell he was desperate. He even mentioned that he had been thinking about me for years, that he regretted everything, and that he wished he had never made the choices he did. I stood there, frozen, listening to him pour out his heart. Part of me wanted to believe him, maybe he was sincere after all. But then I remembered the countless nights my mom and I spent wondering where he was, the birthdays and holidays he missed, the holidays we had to pretend everything was fine while he lived his new life. I remembered how he didn't look back even once, how he never even called to check on me. Those memories came rushing back, and my anger flared. But it didn't end there. His words started to sound rehearsed, like he was trying to say everything I needed to hear, to get back into my good graces. He even said he'd changed. I couldn't tell if it was genuine regret or just desperation to escape the mess he'd created for himself. He was trying so hard to make me feel sorry for him, but I wasn't sure if I could. At that moment, I found myself stuck in a battle. The desire for closure, for a father who would finally be there, and the anger of years spent without him fighting for us. I had to make a decision. I'll tell you what happened next, but trust me, you won't expect it. Stay tuned. As I stood there, listening to my dad, everything inside me was screaming. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him, and to hear that everything was going to be okay, but the other part of me was furious. How could he just waltz back into my life after everything he'd put us through? After years of wondering if he even thought about me? It was like he thought I would just forgive him and everything would be fine, but I couldn't just let go of all that pain. I could feel my heart racing. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, hurt, confusion, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. My dad's apology felt hollow in a way. Sure, he was sorry now, but was it really for what he had done to me, or was he just sorry because his new life had fallen apart? He kept saying how much he regretted his choices, but it didn't change the fact that I had spent years feeling abandoned and alone. My mom, too, she had carried the weight of his absence all on her own, and now, after everything, he thought I was just supposed to welcome him back with open arms? I wanted to scream at him, tell him everything I had kept inside for all those years. The sleepless nights I spent wishing he would call, the school plays and graduations he missed, the broken promises of visits and phone calls. But I couldn't bring myself to say any of it. There was so much anger inside me, so much hurt that I didn't even know where to start. And yet, here he was, standing there asking for my help. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. And my mom. I could hear her voice in my head, telling me not to trust him, to protect myself, to not let him back into our lives so easily. But there was this part of me that wanted to believe that people could change, that maybe my dad really had learned something from everything that had happened. But what if I was just fooling myself? What if he was just trying to manipulate me again? As I stood there, the tension grew thicker. My dad's eyes were pleading, desperate for a place to stay, for a second chance. But what about me? What about the years I spent without him? I thought about all the things I had done without him, graduating high school, making it through tough times, growing up without his guidance. I didn't need him then, so why did I need him now? I turned away, trying to gather my thoughts. But my mind was a mess. I needed space to think, to process everything that was happening. I needed to know if I could ever trust him again. The years of resentment and anger didn't just vanish overnight. But what if he really had changed? What if he was genuine, and I was just too afraid to see it? The weight of the decision was too much for me to carry in that moment. I didn't have the answers. And for the first time in years, I didn't know what to do. The silence between us felt unbearable. My dad shifted nervously, waiting for my response, but I couldn't speak. I didn't even know what to say. Should I open the door and let him in? Or should I shut him out, just like he shut me out all those years ago? The next few moments felt like an eternity. And in that silence, my heart battled against my head. What would I do next? The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. My dad was still standing there, his eyes searching mine for some kind of answer, any sign that I was willing to let him back in. I could hear his shallow breaths, the desperation in them, but it was like I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could hear was the echo of every moment I'd spent without him. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one more chaotic than the last. Was I being selfish for not helping him? Was I punishing him for things he couldn't change, or was I finally standing up for myself, for the years of pain and broken promises? How could I make a choice that wouldn't haunt me for the rest of my life? I glanced at the door. It was an invitation, a way out, a way to close this chapter of my life and protect myself. I could end this right here. I could shut the door, walk away, and never have to deal with him again. That was the safe option, the option that would guarantee I wouldn't be hurt again. But was it the right choice? I couldn't stop thinking about my mom. She had never said much about what happened, but I could feel her pain in everything she did. She had never moved on, never even looked for someone else. She had poured all her love and energy into raising me, and I had never heard her complain. I couldn't imagine how she must have felt, but I knew this moment was about more than just me and my dad. It was about everything he had done to both of us. It was about the family he had destroyed for a dream that had turned out to be nothing but a mirage. My dad's voice broke through the silence again, softer now, almost pleading. Please. I know I don't deserve this, but I have nowhere else to go. I'm not asking for anything, just a place to stay. A chance to prove I've changed. His words felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But I had seen this play out before, the empty promises, the hopes that never came to fruition. Was I really going to let myself fall for this again? Was I really going to let him back into my life after everything? I turned away, pacing back and forth in the small space of the hallway, trying to think through the fog of emotions. My thoughts were a blur, anger, betrayal, sorrow, and something else. Something that felt like a glimpse of hope, the tiniest spark that maybe, just maybe, my dad had changed. But then I thought about the years of him not being there, about how we had managed without him, how my mom had been the one to hold everything together. Could I really risk reopening that wound, only for it to bleed again? My breath came faster now, my mind spinning in circles. There had to be an answer. There had to be a way to make this right. But as the tension built, the one thing I knew for sure was that whatever decision I made, it wouldn't be easy. And whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. I looked at the door again, my hand hovering near the knob. My dad's face was filled with anticipation, but so was mine, as I prepared to make the hardest decision of my life. I had no idea what I was going to do, but one thing was certain, this was it. This was the moment everything would change. Stay tuned to find out how it all unfolds. Just as my hand was about to touch the doorknob, ready to make the decision that would shape everything, something unexpected happened. The sound of a car pulling up in the driveway startled both of us. I froze, and my dad's eyes darted nervously toward the window, his entire demeanor shifting. It was almost as if the hope he'd been clinging to was now replaced with fear. I turned to look out the window, and my heart sank when I saw a familiar face. My stepmom. The woman who had become the center of my dad's new life all those years ago. She was getting out of a car, holding a bag in her hand, and walking toward the house with a purposeful stride. My dad's face went pale, and for the first time since he had shown up, I saw genuine panic in his eyes. "Why is she here?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My dad opened his mouth, but then closed it, as if he didn't have an answer. She doesn't know I came here," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "I didn't tell her where I was going. I needed some space, but now before he could finish, the doorbell rang. My stepmom's voice echoed through the door, loud and clear. "John? I know you're in there. Open up." I couldn't breathe. My dad's world was unraveling in front of me, but it wasn't just his life that was crumbling. It was everything. "John, please. We need to talk. You can't keep running from everything you've messed up," she called out again, her tone a mix of frustration and desperation. My dad's eyes were wide with fear. He looked at me with a strange mix of guilt and urgency. "Please, you can't let her in. She can't know I came here. I don't want her to know that I've failed again." I didn't know what to think. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't about whether I should forgive him or give him a second chance. This was about the truth about everything he had been hiding, everything he had been running from. I didn't know what had been going on between them, but I could tell it wasn't good. His words, "I've failed again," hung in the air like a weight, and in that moment, something shifted. The man standing in front of me wasn't just the father who abandoned me, he was a man who had been running from his own mess, and now, it was crashing down on him. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I was no longer sure that the right thing to do was open that door. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't the end of his story, it was just another chapter. A chapter that was now tangled in lies, regret, and secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to uncover. My dad was standing there, eyes pleading, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. The pressure was unbearable, and for the first time, I had no idea what would happen next. The doorbell rang again, this time louder and more demanding. My dad's face twisted with panic, and for a moment, I thought he might collapse. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the doorframe, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. The clock was ticking, and I knew I had to make a choice. But everything had just gotten so much more complicated. I stepped back, my mind racing. My dad had been standing there begging for forgiveness, but now, with the reality of his other life crashing through the door, I wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible. Was this just another one of his messes he wanted me to clean up? Was I supposed to help him hide from the consequences of his actions once again? "Please, don't let her in," he begged, his voice strained. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him trying to escape, yet again, from everything he had done. I didn't want to get involved in his chaos, but part of me also felt a strange sympathy. I didn't know if it was because I still wanted to believe in him, or if I simply hated seeing someone so broken. My stepmom's voice cut through the air again, louder now, tinged with anger. "John, I know you're in there. I'm not leaving until we talk. And then, something unexpected happened. Before I could say anything, I heard a car engine turn off outside. Another car. I looked out the window again, this time seeing someone I hadn't expected. My mom. She was walking toward the door with the kind of calm determination I knew all too well. My heart skipped a beat. How did she know where I was? Why was she here? My dad's face went pale. What the hell is she doing here? His voice cracked, the fear in it unmistakable. Before I could even process what was going on, my mom knocked on the door, her voice firm but gentle as she spoke. Open the door, sweetheart. We need to talk. The sight of her, standing there so composed, made everything even more real. She had been through her own storm, living with the hurt of being left behind, raising me alone. She didn't need him to come back. She had done just fine without him. And now, she was here, not for him, but for me. I opened the door. My mom stepped in, her eyes briefly locking with my dad's. There was no anger in her gaze, just a calm acceptance of the situation. It was like she had known this moment would come. And in that instant, I realized something. My mom had never needed my dad. She had survived without him, and that made her stronger than anything he could offer. John, she said, her voice steady but firm. This isn't the time for running. You've hurt your daughter, and you've hurt me. But we've both moved on. You can't just come back and expect things to go back to how they were. You need to face your own consequences. No more hiding. For a moment, my dad didn't say anything. He stood there, defeated, as the weight of my mom's words settled in. His perfect life was long gone, and now, there was nothing left but the truth. And then, my stepmom, still waiting outside, spoke again. John, I know you're in there. We need to talk about, but my mom cut her off, her voice loud enough for her to hear. There's nothing left to talk about. He's not coming back to you. And he's not coming back here. The finality in her words left no room for argument. It was over. My dad was standing in the ruins of everything he'd once built, his eyes clouded with regret. But as I stood there, looking at the two most important women in my life, my mom, who had always been the strength I needed, and myself, who had learned how to stand up and face the truth, I realized that this wasn't just about my dad's mistakes. It was about the life we had built, the strength we had found without him, and the realization that sometimes, the best way to move forward is to leave the past where it belongs. Just as I was about to close the door, my dad turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. Please. Can't you just forgive me? I looked at him, the words I had been holding back for so long on the tip of my tongue. But instead of saying anything, I simply closed the door. And as the finality of that action settled over me, I knew it was the right choice. Not just for me, but for all of us. I stood there for a moment, the sound of my dad's faint voice still ringing in my ears. The weight of the door felt heavy in my hand as I held it shut, my heart racing. I'd made the decision, but it didn't come without a price. Walking away from him wasn't just about rejecting his apology, it was about reclaiming control over my life, about no longer allowing his past mistakes to define me. Outside, I could hear the muffled voices of my mom and my dad's ex-wife, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had finally taken a stand for myself. I had spent too long being hurt by his actions, too long waiting for him to be the father I wanted him to be, and it had cost me too much. But now, standing in the quiet of my house, I could breathe again. I felt a sense of clarity, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I had my life back. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't need him to validate my worth or my choices. My mom stepped into the house a few minutes later, her expression calm but firm. She didn't need to say anything, her presence alone was enough. She knew exactly what I was feeling, because she had been through it all too. As she walked over and wrapped her arms around me, I felt a wave of gratitude for the woman who had always been there, who had never given up on me. You did the right thing, she whispered, and for the first time, I believed it. As time went on, my dad never came back. His life continued to crumble, but I realized that wasn't my responsibility anymore. He had to face his own choices, just like I had to face mine. I still didn't have all the answers, and maybe I never would. But I knew one thing, I was stronger than I had ever been before. My journey wasn't about forgiving him, it was about learning to let go and move forward without the weight of his mistakes holding me back. The door had closed on that chapter of my life, but it also opened a new one where I could finally live for myself, without being defined by the past. And in the end, that was the most freeing thing of all. Looking back, I realized it wasn't about whether or not my dad deserved my forgiveness. It was about learning that I deserved peace, that I deserved to take back control of my life. And with that realization, I knew I was finally free.